Good afternoon and greetings of peace. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the compassionate, the most merciful. I'm not saying that just for today. We always begin with those words as Muslims. Apologies for being behind this big podium. I wore yellow so you can still find me, see me where I am. My beloved daughter returned to our Creator recently, and so as many of you know, that when you're in mourning, a big part of your mind is so preoccupied with that loss. So these days, today I said, you know what, I'm gonna rely on a podium and a few cards just to help remind me in case I love to be with her and think of her, but I need to be here with you. So out of compassion for myself, and I know you'll grant me that, I'm giving myself these supports. And we all need some supports at different times. At the end of kindergarten in Canada, where I grew up, we didn't start school till we were 5 years old. And I grew up in a family of 7 children, between whom there was a 10-year age difference. So between the oldest and the youngest, there was only 10 years. I was the 6th child. So you can imagine in that situation, even with wonderful parents and other family members, I sometimes felt that I didn't quite get the attention that I wanted or I deserved. So at the end of kindergarten, on the last day, the teacher got up at the front of the classroom and said, I'm going to announce who is the girl of the year and who is the boy of the year. And I won girl of the year. And I was given this large, fragrant, white gardenia. It was just beautiful, just full of this beautiful fragrance and lovely and soft to the touch. And she gave it to me and I held it and I felt very special, really. And after that, I walked outside with the rest of the class and I was standing there feeling happy holding this flower when a classmate, who I will call for the purposes of protecting her identity, I'll call her today Dee Dee. Dee Dee came up, she grabbed the flower, she threw it on the ground, she stamped on it and said, "What makes you so special?" And I was a little bit afraid. I wasn't sure if the violence was also going to be transferred to me. And I was sad looking at my lovely flower squished and stomped on the ground. But behind all of that, as I looked at her face, there was a much stronger and more lasting emotion that I can feel until today. I'm 53. It was a long time ago. And that was a deep sense of compassion for her. I could see the pain on her angry little face. She was so small and skinny. And I realized that in her words, when she said, "What makes you so special?" what she was saying is, why am I not special? Why didn't anyone see that I'm special too? Where does this compassion come from? The compassion that overrode my sadness, my being upset at the loss of the flower, the fear that maybe she would become violent with me. I was only a child. As a Muslim, reflecting upon it over the last many years and learning that compassion, in fact, is what my teacher, Dr. Omar Abdullah, calls the stamp of creation. Other than the personal name Allah, which means the God in Arabic, the next name, personal name of God is Ar-Rahman, the compassionate. Sometimes people translate it as the merciful, and then the word that's paired with it, ar-Rahim, they translate as compassionate. But I think Rahman really is compassion, and both words come from the root Rahim, which is womb. The womb by which our mothers gave birth to us. So Rahma, compassion, is our home. That is where we are born. And as Muslims, we believe that our souls come into being first in the presence of Ar-Rahman, of the compassionate, before we are embodied. And so it is in compassion that we feel most at home and we feel most whole. We feel like we are where we should be. Think of so many people when they're near their deaths, even if they're very, very old, they call out for their mother. People who work with the dying know that. Or they start talking a lot. You can tell that someone might be close to death if they're talking a lot about their mother. So mother is that metaphor for that original, first, primordial place in which we're born. So if that's our home, how do we wander away from home? How do we get lost from that? How do we get separated from that? If I go back to Didi, and I think she too was a child, like I was a child, what happened? And we've heard today, for example, about the science of attachment and what happens to us when we are neglected, when we're not given the love and attention and care we need. Muslims believe that God created us with what the Quran calls fitra, which this original whole disposition, a sense of wholeness, a sense of comfort in compassion, and also an awareness, a general awareness of basic right and wrong. With compassion comes a sense of justice. Now we think of them sometimes as opposites, but they're two sides of the coin. And so honestly, Girl of the Year, it was unjust. It was absurd. I mean, how to do that to all those children? What about it? What made me Girl of the Year? Perhaps my parents were more rigorous with good manners. Maybe it's just because I was born an introvert, so I wasn't the person who was naturally running around the room and had all this extra energy. I didn't do anything really to deserve it. And it was an act of injustice to her, certainly. She felt it. So when we've had our fitra, our sense of wholeness, our sense of comfort in this compassionate, whole being, when it's been covered up and we've had to, follow a different path, because if you were raised by criminals and you're told this is the way, to survive and you have to do it or I'll hit you, then you know it's wrong, and then you have to rationalize it to yourself, and you get in the habit of rationalization and you feel broken, you don't feel right. So we all, in smaller and larger parts, go away from it. But how do we return to it? And this is what I find really beautiful about our teachings, is that it's always there waiting to be uncovered. It's always there as our home to return to. We can always, maybe with a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of support, get back to that state. Now, there are many kinds of people in the world, and if there are many kinds of people, introverts and extroverts and scientifically minded and creatively minded, if compassion indeed is the stamp of creation, then there must be many different ways to get back to it. And so exercising the intellect, performing good deeds, learning social norms and manners, examining our conscience, cleaning and polishing our heart of anger, envy, spite, and resentment, and holding on to faith that everyone and everything is where it should be. This is what we call in our faith qadr, a belief that wherever we are is where we're supposed to be. And that means that even in the most difficult circumstances and circumstances of evil, we can access that original fundamental nature of compassion. And how many of you, I wonder, have gone to help people, to help a person who, out of an act of compassion, you went to help them because you felt so sorry for them, for their situation, you felt so empathetic. And there, you found that they acted so compassionately towards you. I've worked with refugees, I've worked with ill people, and every time I went out of compassion to try to help someone, I found them even more compassionate towards me. Refugees in a refugee camp during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, who when they found out that I had just got married and I didn't have any family with me, and I wasn't given any, jewelry or fancy clothes, refugees in a refugee camp then 2 weeks later said, we're going to have a wedding party for you. And they threw me a party, and they sewed me a dress, and they gave me gifts. Wow. So I think it's us, it's the privileged people who have the most difficult time really having this purity of compassion. We need to get back to it, because honestly, what makes us so special? We didn't select the family that we were born in. I didn't select my genetic makeup. I didn't invent medicine in the university that I went to and all of these advantages. Yet how many of us think that we are self-made men, people? Selfishness is the big block to compassion. And so for the intellectual person to go through the simple facts that we have not made ourselves, neither our bodies nor our genetic makeup, nor did we do anything to choose our family. This is an intellectual exercise for those who may have a slightly hardened heart to look at the facts and might be able to crack open with that factual intellectual exercise a path for compassion. For many spiritual practices that are embodied, I demonstrated prayer yesterday, but things like fasting, I tell you, if I didn't have to fast once a year, I just don't know what kind of person I would be. I mean, it is a remembrance of myself. It is a remembrance of my Creator. It is also that opportunity to truly experience thirst and hunger, and that visceral understanding that can't come through reading or through someone telling you about it. You may be able to see it, but to experience is so different. And that's another path. Muhasaba, taking account of myself. And this is the interior work that if I do all of these other things, I need to do this, what is called a taking of account, literally, muhasaba in Arabic, where I regularly, during my prayers, add that time for what is in my heart. Is there anger in my heart? Is there envy in my heart? Is there resentment in my heart? Because all of these can be barriers and roadblocks to compassion. So clean our heart, to open it and get rid of those barriers. There are so many things that we can do to open up paths of compassion. And one of them, I think, is something that we can do every day and at all places and all times, and comes from the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him. And I think it's this. We, especially now, we live in a society where we are told that there are so many things we don't have. We live in a culture of deprivation. Even if we have much, we feel we don't have much. The prophetic teaching, when you see someone who has more, look to someone who has less. And it is the looking. And the Prophet Muhammad, when he spoke to people and when he looked at people, he looked at them full face. He didn't have his head, his body turned ready to go out the door and looking. It was the full face look at people. And we know when we see the face of others and we're face to face, there is something very instinctive that opens up within us and opens up that path to compassion. And all of us can do that wherever we are. So in conclusion, I want to say there are so many avenues to explore. Sometimes people are a little bit nervous when they hear, words like compassion. They think, well, I don't really like meditating, or I'm not that kind of person, or they feel that they're going to be forced to conform to a certain way of into this learning. But given that compassion is the stamp of creation, there are roads and avenues for all of us. And so I'm so happy to be able to explore that together.
Thank you, Dr. Mattson. That was very moving, and it's special being up here right now because there's so much infused compassion that I think we're not touching our chairs. It's quite amazing up here. I don't know if you're feeling it out there. I guess you are. Reflections, comments, reactions, please.
Well, thank you so much. It was really very inspiring. And I love the imagery of home, compassion, the state of compassion as being your kind of natural home, and kind of awakening compassion, cultivating compassion is in some ways returning home. So I was wondering whether you would like to kind of flesh this out a bit more, because there is something very beautiful about this, because sometimes we have an idea that somehow we need to work hard at it, and we have to kind of, there's people kind of think in terms of exertion and effort. But on the other hand, if it's a matter of returning home, there's a kind of a naturalness, which means that we just happen to have strayed. But if we had strayed, we also may be able to find our way back.
And it depends how far we've wandered from home, whether it's going to be very difficult or not. And that's why it's really a collective effort to try to help, people who haven't gone that far, or if they have. I mean, if you're in a thorny thicket of shrubs, and you've got to, break out through them, it's going to be difficult, and you may need someone to help you, pull them back and give you some support. And so it really depends, but I think what I find most comforting about it is that if it's our natural state, we never lose hope for anyone. We never write anyone off. We never say they've gone so far, it's impossible for them to get back. It may be awfully difficult. And the kind of, we don't expect the same for everyone.
But no one is beyond redemption.
No one is. And it may be, we may not be able to fulfill our responsibility in this life to help everyone, and they may not get the help they need. But of course, we believe that this life that we're living in now is not the only plane of existence, and that there's still an opportunity for people to grow beyond that. So we never give up hope.
Thank you.
So I think you've addressed and maybe answered the question about, is compassion possible with impartiality in your response right now? I think what you said is, yes, of course. No one is beyond redemption. Everyone has this home of compassion.
And part of it is, and I mentioned this yesterday when I was demonstrating the prayer, sometimes if the source of our pain and our loss is other people, it may not be possible for some people to truly experience that compassion among other people at a certain point. Yet we're in creation that is formed by compassion. And so that's why you see, for example, with some very hardened prisoners, they'll bring animals, and they'll do animal therapy with them, and that's the thing that will bring out the compassion. There is a place for everyone, but we as human beings sometimes haven't done our job very well. So for some, it may not be among us. You know, I think for most of us it should be, and we should be able to, but we should find those spaces also for those who just can't get back to it among us. But certainly we are, you know, have brothers and sisters in all of creation, and even if it's under a tree that is also given the compassionate shade and the coolness under that